London, AIM and Toronto main board listed Horizonte Minerals is on a mission to become the world's leading nickel development company, with a focus on Brazil with two 100% owned assets, with its Araguaia ferro-nickel project aimed at the stainless steel market and the Vermelho nickel cobalt project targeting the electric vehicle market. The company believes it's positioning itself well for the future. It's pre-revenue, so we'll be looking into the balance sheet and the strength of that now with the Chief Executive, Jeremy Martin. Jeremy, good to talk to you again.
Good morning.
It's good to have you back in the studio because there's a lot to ask you as you edge towards that production target date of 2022. You've just raised some money, in fact 25 million, so we've seen an uptick in the share price. We'll get an update on the share price in just a minute, but let's talk first of all about what you're doing, because I mentioned these two projects here, and I believe I'm right in saying that the ferro-nickel project is the main flagship, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, they're both 100% owned. Araguaia is at the feasibility stage. We're now going through project financing. And the aim is we have the full construction financing package in place for middle of next year, and then we start construction. Vermelho, although it's had a feasibility study completed by Vale, we're currently completing a pre-feasibility, and that will be the next project in the pipeline to develop. Yeah. So that's the state of each of the assets.
Okay, well let's take the nickel one first of all, because clearly that is the big one. And I want to look at that in the context of this royalty financing you've just raised, 25 million. Now that's at halfway, I think we were looking at something like 4.3 million on the balance sheet. So this obviously puts you in a very, very strong financial position. First of all, how difficult was it to raise that money? I mean, in the current markets.
Good question. I think you know the equity markets. The equity markets have been very challenging for junior mining companies. We looked at this slightly differently. We said, look, we've kept this asset, the Araguaia project, clean all the way through this journey from discovery, moving into project financing, so that we had these tools available at the project finance stage. So one of the ways you can look to raise financing is to sell a royalty on the project, and that's what we did. We ran a process. That effectively means that the royalty purchaser will take a percentage of future revenue. We ran a process in the first half of the year, and there are not that many tier one base metals royalty groups in play at the moment, but we had a good group. We had 4 or 5 of the major players, and we were successful with Orion Mine Finance. Orion is one of the largest mining private equity firms today, and they've effectively paid $25 million up front in cash for a 2.25% royalty on Araguaia. And it's fairly well constrained to a production profile, and there are other tools around to control that royalty. So from our point of view, it was a very good transaction for the company. And as you say, the share price reacted on the back of it. I think the key thing that investors want to know is there a path to financing these projects? And this is a big step forwards.
I guess doing it the royalty way says a lot about the impressions that you're giving to the market about the quality of the project.
Well, I think that's an important point, exactly. So Orion did an extensive due diligence process, and that sort of gives you the tick, the seal of approval. They've been through technically, legally, and from an investor's point of view, it's non-dilutive. So you weren't going in and doing a diluted equity raise. And more importantly, Orion manage around $5 billion today, and we see this as part of a building relationship with Orion, so you could see them coming in at the next stage of the capital raise.
We hear a lot about the cash burn, the cash runway and so forth. I said 2022 production, is that still your target?
That is correct.
Does this runway of cash last you right through now? Is this all this 25 million going into Araguaia?
Correct, it is purely targeted for Araguaia, so this will run us all the way through to start of production. So I think our balance sheet today is around 30 million sterling, so we've got a very robust balance sheet.
Yeah, let's take a look at the share price. You mentioned the share price. I think it's important just to witness what's happening here. This uptick here, as you're talking about, is the royalty financing of 25 million. You've got a company here which is worth around about 63 million, I think, just before we came into the studio to look at this. But you've got what value in terms of nickel under the ground?
Well, I think if we just look at Araguaia, because obviously that's the one that is the most advanced, if you take today's nickel price, which is $17,500, it gives a net present value on the project of around $800 million. After payback of the capital, it generates over $3 billion of free cash flow over the 25-year mine life. So there's a long way to go on this story, and that's without bringing Vermelho into the valuation piece as well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that project as well, because I said at the top, again, we're all talking about electric vehicles. That's the big thing at the moment. And we hear a lot about Cobalt and the fact that it's going to be one of the big things needed. What do you say to investors about your opportunities there? Again, it's a 100% owned project.
Correct. Well, I think we say that if you're looking for exposure to nickel, we're the company to look at. You have Araguaia, which will produce ferronickel to go into the stainless steel market, which is the main driver for the nickel market today. Obviously then, there isn't a day that goes past now without reference to electric vehicles and the build out of electric vehicles. So Vermelho is a unique asset. We acquired it from Vale. Why we liked it was because it's within trucking distance of Araguaia. So it's not in a different country or a different state. This is all a continuous area where you can basically truck from one deposit to the other. And Vermelho, Vale spent over $200 million on it. They gave it the construction go-ahead. It's probably one of the highest grade nickel cobalt resources in the world, and we are effectively in the final stages of releasing a pre-feasibility study. And what we've done is we've taken that very high quality data that Vale generated, and we've created a smaller footprint, smaller capital cost project. And the product from that will be nickel and cobalt sulfate, which is obviously used in the battery market for the EV space. So what we're saying is we've got stainless steel from Araguaia, and then we've got nickel and cobalt sulfate for the growing battery market. So we can cover both marketplaces.
So what's in the share price then at where we are in London, 4.26 pence, which sounds ridiculous really when you consider a company this size with that sort of potential?
I think, as we talked about earlier, it's all about showing the market that you're de-risked, that you are able to finance this. I mean, it's a challenging market today, and I think Orion goes a long way to close that gap. As we go forwards, we're working on the main project finance piece. We've got 7 of the main international and Brazilian banks as part of that syndicate. And our aim is, as we move into the second half of the last part of the year, you'll start to see news flow around the project finance piece, and then close that off in the second half of next year, beginning of the second half of next year.
Yeah, we've got some client questions actually, which I'd like to put to you if we can, to talk a little bit more about what's going on. How do you see demand and the fundamentals of the nickel market affecting Horizonte over the coming 12 to 24 months, which takes us pretty much up to the sort of period?
Yeah, I think the nickel market is the key part of this story. As I said before we started, I mean, we've built this company over the last 8 years from discovery, acquiring assets from the majors like Glencore and Vale when we've had nickel price trading at 10-year lows. And what we've seen is we've had a period for the last 3 or 4 years where nickel has been trading at historic lows. There's been no new money going into the next generation of projects. And then suddenly this year we've started to see nickel price break out of those 5 to 6 year lows. And the big catalyst was at the end of August when the Indonesian government said we're going to stop or bring forwards the ban on direct shipping ore. And that's where we saw the price spike. Going forwards, I think demand side is robust. It's running at around 4 to 5% a year. And Araguaia will come online right at the sort of opportune point in that demand cycle. So I think timing is very good for us.
Yeah. The recent resource upgrade mentioned that you've issued, it mentioned a significant new nickel resource. The question really wants some perspective on what Horizonte already has under the ground.
Again, we released another resource for around 40 million tonnes at 1.4% nickel on one of the northern areas. That takes our total nickel inventory over 280 million tonnes, 3.5 million tonnes of actual nickel in the ground. This is one of the largest nickel inventories outside of the major nickel producers, so it's a pretty unique opportunity we have.
Yeah, let's move on to the cobalt business, Vermelho. Targeting the battery-grade nickel and cobalt market, what might this project look like? I mean, you've spoken a little bit about the project.
Exactly. I mean, it's going to be a standalone operation. It's about 150 kilometres north of Araguaia. We're aiming in this pre-feasibility to have a nickel production profile of around 18 to 20,000 tonnes of nickel a year and around 1,000 tonnes of cobalt in sulfate form. Capital cost will be slightly higher than Araguaia, but it will be a financeable package. And this will be a project that is scalable, it's long life, it'll have over 30 years of mine life, and we see this being something that is very attractive to that automotive battery market.
Do you think you will be in a position to pay for the capex on that project from the money then coming through from nickel, or will you be doing it as a completely separate way like you've done with the royalty financing?
I think there's a couple of development opportunities. One, obviously our focus is to build out Araguaia. That will pay a significant dividend in the current price environment. We will most likely look for a partner for Vermelho. I think it would be too much for Horizonte to look to develop 2 projects at once. So I think focus on Araguaia, look to partner on Vermelho, but equally you've got to look at the bigger picture, and that 300 or 400 million tonnes of resource we've talked about. There is the potential between the two projects to build a 40 to 50,000 tonne a year nickel business, and that would put you in the top 10 nickel producers worldwide. So it's a big undertaking.
Something clearly on the front page of your website you're aiming to do. The next question really sort of touches on what you've just spoken about. Having two Worldcast projects next to each other, both of course in Brazil, do you expect to develop both or join forces with a strong partner for either or both of these? I mean, this is all about how to fund it and how to move forward and maybe bring in some expertise as well, I suppose.
Correct. I mean, Araguaia is a low-risk process route that we're adopting there. And with the current nickel price and the indications we're getting, we see that being financeable as Horizonte. Vermelho is a larger project. I think that is something that we would definitely look to partner with. What form that may take, it may be a downstream battery producer, but equally it may be a miner. So I think what we're saying is that is open in terms of what that may look like going forwards.
How about offtake talks? When do they start? We've heard nothing material, I don't think, on that
I think we opened the offtake door as part of the Orion transaction. Right. We got very good interest. What it was telling us is there are very few offtakes available on ferronickel operations. That will move forwards at sort of the latter part of this year, mid Q4, and with the aim of having an offtake in place in Q1 next year. But what we've seen, that was when we were looking at $14,000 a tonne nickel. I think at 17.5, 18, I think the appetite will be even stronger. Yeah. I think that's probably the easier part of the piece to close out.
Yeah. We've spoken a lot about electric vehicles. You can't talk about that without talking about the biggest manufacturer of electric vehicles in the world, Tesla. And indeed, this question was, any thoughts on Tesla looking for a raw material supplier or even getting into the business of mining? Possible partner?
We haven't had contact with Tesla. I suspect we may well do going forwards, but I know from other activity in the market that they are obviously looking at offtake. Will they become a primary miner? I suspect unlikely. I don't think you'll see many of the automotive manufacturers going down that route, but I think definitely there is a strong drive to secure supply. There's a strong drive for ethical sourcing, i.e. non-DRC, or so that is what plays very nicely into Brazil. It's a clean, ethical jurisdiction to be sourcing from. So I think that will play very much in Vermelho's favour.
You've been at Horizonte, in fact, as long as I can remember. We've spoken a number of times before in both our careers, and you've been at Horizonte. What keeps you awake at night? Because clearly you've set things up neatly. Things seem to be working well. You've got your production target and date. You've got your money. As I say, the runway is clear. What is it that concerns you about these projects? Is there anything that really in the background we should be aware of?
I think in terms of our story, I mean, this is a project that Horizonte we discovered, and we've taken it all the way through from early discovery, pre-feasibility, feasibility. I mean, all of those journeys are fairly long lead times, partially because the market comes and goes during that journey. So at the moment we're in a very strong position with the market. There's always challenges. There's labour challenges, there's obviously geopolitical, but on that side Brazil is a very good jurisdiction to operate. We're in a mining region, we've got skilled labour. I think the biggest challenge is balancing what the market's doing with where your financing need, and we talked at the start of this with Brexit. Obviously that has connotations on what the market's doing, how people are deploying capital. So it's about being able to look forwards and ensure that you've sort of seen through where you want to be and how you get there. Yeah,
I was going to bring that in. We spoke briefly, as you say, about Brexit before we went to air. Let me just ask you, is there anything that worries you about what's happening, the political shenanigans here in the UK? Does it connect at all with your business?
Yes, I mean, we're obviously a London-listed company. I mean, it affects investor confidence. It affects where people want to deploy capital and when. So I think uncertainty is always challenging, and we're in an uncertain time. As I say, I think at the moment our message is we're funded. We're not in the market at this point in time, and obviously we will see resolution going forwards. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to catch up with you, and thanks indeed for joining us. Jeremy Martin is the Chief Executive of Horizonte Minerals.
Thanks very much.